关于美国的对外政策，汉森教授怎么看待这个多边的策略呢？
Yeah, I think that was a good idea. That was the best thing that I can think of that Trump did, and that was to round up Australia, as I said, Philippines, some people in Southeast Asia, South Korea, Japan, and Taiwan, and say to them all, what do you need and what would you like to do? And what do you want us to do? Because the Trump were very realistic people. They were not going to get out in front and say, you know what, we're not going to go out and fight for you guys if we think that you're going to pull the rug under us. But if you want to resist Chinese aggression, we're going to help you coordinate, we're going to supply you, and we're going to be there for you. And I think if Biden is wise, he'll respect that. I'm a little bit worried that when he talks about multilateral, that's not what he's talking about. He's talking about the Europeans and the United Nations. And anybody in today's world who thinks the Europeans or NATO is going to do anything for anybody, or the United Nations is ever going to respect democratic government or favor individual liberty is sorely mistaken. It's never going to happen.
美国社会目前面临着可以说是比较分裂的状况，中共政府是不是在钻这个空子呢？
Absolutely. The Chinese government sees two things in the United States. It sees a country that it feels was divisive and did not handle the virus the way that they did. We don't know how they, as you know, we don't know how they handled it because all of their data is suspect. But they're actually saying to us, if you talk to American officials who've talked to people in the Chinese Communist government, they have a different attitude now than they did before. It's not, oh, we're very sorry that this got out by accident or there was a wet market. It's more or less is, you might have done it, not us. And if it did come from us, we did all we could. If you don't like it, tough. And you know what? Off the record, we would hate to see SARS-3. But if SARS-2 did this, you can imagine what SARS-3 did. So you better work with us to stop this. Ha ha. So they're very defiant now because they feel that the virus seriously weakened the West. It nearly destroyed the European economy. It hurt the US economy. It destroyed the first administration in history that stood up to China, the Trump administration. And in their way of thinking, for all of the death and all of the destruction, they came out better and stronger than before the virus. And in the communist mind, if that's true, then they don't see anything wrong with it. They're not moralists. No communist government anywhere in history has been a moral government. And so that's, I think, how they're looking at the virus. And then second, they feel that they have appealed to the American left in a very successful fashion for the last 40 years. When I was a student, as an undergraduate and a graduate student, if I walked on campus, I never saw one picture of Chiang Kai-shek, not one. Now you could say that he was dictatorial, he was authoritarian, but he kept that country non-communist, and he gave it the chance to evolve into a democracy. That may have not been his intention, but it was vastly superior to what Mao did. He did not kill 50 million people. But yet every dorm I saw, there was that little hat of Mao with a red star. This was in the 70s and 80s. And when I would see students that say UC Santa Cruz, or you'd actually see students with a red star wearing a Mao hat. Oh. And so that was the romance. And if you think I'm exaggerating, remember that Barack Obama's communications director, Anita Dunn, when she went to a school, she says, you all have to adopt heroes. I know that one of my heroes is Mao Zedong. She said that. And she was very angry when people corrected her and said he's the greatest mass murderer of the 20th century. So China thinks that the left has a very naive, romantic view of Mao and the communist traditions. And they play that up all the time among the left. And there are people in the left that are now running the government that do not think that China is a danger to the world in general, or specifically to the United States. They just don't see it. And it frightens me. I've talked to some of them. and they really don't see it. And yet they talk about human rights. And I think the problem is that if you look at Chinese propaganda compared to Soviet Cold War propaganda, it's like a child to a parent. Chinese are so much more sophisticated and brilliant, and they understand so much better America. When at the height of the Cold War, there were no Russian students within the United States. Nobody knew much about it. If you look at Hollywood today, every villain in all of the superhero movies or whatever detective show or conspiracy movie from Hollywood, the villains are all white, they have tattoos, and half of them have a Russian accent, you know what I mean? And they look like they're oligarchs, or they're crazy. Everybody hates Russia, that's the thing. Russia is 160 million people. But when you look at China, the Chinese government actually said to Hollywood, left-wing Hollywood, you know what, if you're going to have African-American or Hispanic actors in your movies, we want them light-skinned, because dark people do not sell well in China. So if you want us to merchandise your films, we're going to adjudicate. And you know what Hollywood did? Yes, sir, we will do exactly what you want. And they did that. And that's how subtle and clever China is. When an NBA coach says, I'm really worried about the re-education camps among the Uyghurs, bam, China said, okay, no more franchising here, no more endorsements for you, LeBron. Bang, next day, Steve Kerr from the Warriors said, well, you know what, we have mass murders in the United States, so why are we talking about them killing people? So I think there's 187 people were killed in the United States by deranged individuals, not systematically by the Chinese government, nothing comparable. But that's how they operate. And they're very sophisticated, brilliant. And I don't think Americans are up to the challenge. You got to remember one last thing, and that is Americans have a very warm spot for China. There was a China lobby in the 1930s. China lost 15 million people that were slaughtered by the Japanese. Americans, when I grew up, and my father flew 40 missions in a B-29 over Japan, and my namesake was killed on Okinawa. And so when I was a little boy, when they talked about Japanese and Chinese, not Americans, but Chinese and China and Japanese, they always said that Chinese were the noble people and Japanese were the dangerous people because of what had happened in the war. And then when the Civil War broke out, nobody applied to Mao standards that they did to the Japanese. Mao was a hero, and we actually tilted toward him in some cases over Chiang Kai-shek. And then when all of this murder went on in the Great Leap Forward and the Cultural Evolution, we never came out and condemned China the way that we would of anybody else. And so there's a long history. The United States was not a colonialist power in China in the way that Europeans were. So there's this goodwill toward China, and a lot of Americans are ignorant, and they do not distinguish Hong Kong and Taiwan vis-a-vis mainland China. And so that's the problem. And when you add money and numbers and cultural influence into the equation, there's just no way that Hong Kong and Taiwan have any chance of reaching Americans in the way that the communist Chinese do.